I'm going to be talking to Peter MacKay, who is a Grande Prairie teacher and was a member of the ATA, Alberta Teachers Association bargaining committee. And we're going to be talking about the Alberta teacher strike. So, welcome to the interview, Peter.
All right. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
I have to tell you, a lot of teachers have contacted me and said they're mad. They were either upset about the back to work order and the use of the notwithstanding clause by the Alberta government. They thought there should have been more action after some more pushback against the government. The general strike has been mentioned, rotating strike, something like that. What's your take on that?
Well, I think honestly, anger was inevitable given how this played out because teachers were very activated, like to a degree I've never seen before. Teachers, you had people honestly creating networks, social networks, supporting one another in actions. Teachers driving down from Edmonton to Calgary and vice versa. People taking part in any number of different things, and a real level of energy. And honestly, one of the aspects was. I think teachers felt that, and I think somewhat to the surprise of a lot of teachers, but certainly a lot of Albertans, that we were winning with the public. And then the government basically, it's kind of a clumsy term, but they cheated, so to speak. They used the power of the legislative pen and didn't just do that, though. They used the notwithstanding clause to deprive teachers of their charter rights, their rights under the Alberta Human Rights Act, um, and more than that. And in doing so, imposed, and they did it in such. I mean, this government has surprised me, and I think surprised a lot of people. In that you always think that they're going to be, you have a bead on how far they'll go, and they're always worse than you think. And in this case, they were considerably worse. They had the option to go into mediation, they had to go into arbitration. They could have done any number of different things, but they chose to impose a settlement on teachers using the notwithstanding clause, and in so doing, deprive teachers of their charter rights for 4 years. And then teachers found themselves, after all of this sense of, solidarity and support, suddenly just left like that's it, right? So all of that energy is going to go somewhere, and given how this transpired, I think that teachers have to, I can't say I'm surprised at all that teachers are angry.
Okay, let's talk about that because there was a press conference that had the ATA was there. There were a number of other labor unions and labor movement organizations, some of them from outside of Alberta. There was a lot of solidarity, and the sense that I got was that if the ATA had wanted to really fight, like call a strike, do something, they would have had support, including financial support, because remember, the back to work order had a penalty of $500,000 fine per day that they defied the order. So they were going to bring money to the table. And in the words of one person I talked to, the ATA turtled. Could I get your response to that?
Well, okay, so I mean, just hearing this, the well, two things. I've certainly heard teachers say the same thing that the ATA they felt the ATA I mean I've seen teachers on social media use that same term. I'll say this in response to what you just what you say that you heard from your contacts. I mean, if that was the case, then the broader labor movement, like needed to signal this, like this needed to be told to members this message had to reach teachers. The first time I've heard it is when you said it, just in the last few minutes. So that's, I think, has to be taken into account because we are talking about a very, like the government didn't just take away the charter rights, they put in place such a draconian set of penalties that, and the intention of those penalties, obviously, I mean, they're intended to do exactly what it, as it turned out, they did, compel teachers to go back to work. Now, coming back to what I was saying earlier, the problem is, is there any way they're gonna go back to work kind of meekly, right? I don't think that's a possibility anymore. I think the genie's out of the bottle with this. But what hasn't occurred, and I do think there's still some, I see, some conversation about this among teachers, and I've had conversation with people myself, waiting to see is like, is there something they're going to do? Because to the best of my knowledge, what is going on at the moment is through a Stand for Education campaign, a website. You sign up for it, and it says sign a petition. The ATA has indicated that they are exploring legal options and they're looking at going through the courts. And as far as I know, that's it. Okay, at this point. Now, keep in mind, we are literally 1 week. I mean, the legislation hadn't even passed. We're on, it's a little after 8 o'clock on Monday, the 3rd of November. It was just a week ago, and they went late into the night, right? So perhaps something else is coming, but I think what teachers are waiting for is, okay, give us something to do. Members need something to do. And the fact that that direction hasn't been given, I do think this is a very fraught moment for the Alberta Teachers Association.
I interviewed Gil McGowan, the president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, after the press conference that the labor movement had. And he made the point, he said, look, the kind of action that the teachers were asking for doesn't happen overnight. It takes organization and it takes resources, and it's just going to take us a little while to get our ducks in a row so that we can act. So in fairness to the ATA and to the labor movement, that's their position. But then on the other hand, hearing the teachers talk, and as your comments reflect this, is somebody's got to push back with something. That doing nothing while we're organizing and so on is just unacceptable. And it seems like there's this anger brewing and something, the pressure's building and the cork's got to pop at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way it's going now, and let's be clear, I think if you, put any number of teachers in a room, everyone's going to recognize that the people who deserve teachers' anger, it's this government. This government, through underfunding, created this problem. This government gaslit about the problem they'd created for the longest time. And then when given the opportunity through collective bargaining to find a path forward to, just getting us back to something normal, chose not to, and chose to the most brutal possible way to prevent that path from occurring. So the anger really does need to be towards the government. However, the government has stymied all kinds of legitimate expressions of anger. Okay. You can't strike anymore. There's no more work to rule. There's lots of chatter. I will tell you about, like, initially, apparently this has been rolled back, but apparently government initially was asking for reports of teacher absences. First of all, this just indicates a lack of sense of how schools work, right? Like, teachers aren't, and there's not to diminish, but there's plenty of people who might just not show up for work, right? I used to be a UFCW worker at a Cargill plant outside of High River. In a strike situation, or if, something of that nature, if people don't show, people just don't show, right? Like, sometimes you're a no-show at that kind of job. You can't no-show as a teacher. You can't, if you teach grade 2, you have to give notice you're not going to be there, because you can't have a group of grade 2 kids without anyone, like, making arrangements to have someone cover them. So it just indicated, like, all of these mechanisms, these things were very quickly put in place. There was this very heavy-handed approach from the government, but honestly, it does, like, I can't argue with you. The perception I'm hearing from teachers, and including my wife's a teacher, is like, what is going on? Like, what is the direction? The one thing I will say is, over the course of this strike, teachers developed, I think, a culture of supporting each other and a set of networks, both like in-person networks and social networks. There's a number of communities on social media. Let's Talk Alberta Education is one of them. Alberta Teacher Tales. There's, I have a Facebook and an Instagram profile with a reasonable amount of, following, and people have very much, you know, used those networks to build themselves up. But then it feels like just kind of, it was like a record scratch, right? When that all happened, okay, so now they have to give us a direction. Some of the direction that's coming right now, I will say the place that's giving me and a lot of teachers the greatest feeling of whatever optimism we have is the recall petitions that are being lined up against a number of government MLAs. There's already one in operating with Demetrius Nicolaides in his riding, and of course there is the movement against the petition, kind of along the lines of what Thomas Lukaszuk did with Forever Canada in terms of defunding private schools. So there's the possibility of more of these. I have heard, and I think this comment was made, it was perhaps made by Gil McGowan, that one of the things they're looking at is this kind of alternate or more creative approach. But one of the elements was like, I mean, I'll say this: I heard Gil, on your show. It sure sounded like a lot of very aggressive. Do you know what I mean? Like it sounded like if this happens, if they cross this line, and then when they absolutely didn't just cross the line, they jumped clean over that line. I think in a way beyond what almost anyone really predicted they would do. What did we find ourselves with? Basically, wait and see. So that has led to this kind of frustration. For the most part, that's only somewhat made its way in terms of anger towards their own association, but it's brewing out there for sure.
Is there any chance whatsoever that the teachers are just going to go quietly into the good night? That they are, if the ATA and the labor movement doesn't do something more aggressive, if they take a fairly passive approach, that teachers are just going to shrug their shoulders and go, well, what are we going to do? Or the alternative.
I think there's no chance of that. The anger is too widespread and it's felt too deeply. And I'll just be explicit with this: that anger is either going to find an avenue, is going to find direction in an effective way against government, or I think there's a very real chance it turns onto their own association, right? Like one of that's a real risk that I think the provincial council has. And by the way, I've talked to members of provincial council who recognize this, right? Who feel that this is a concern. And I know that someone would watch this and they'd be like, well, trying to divide teachers. That's not what this is. This is a circumstance where the government did something egregious, did it to all of us, did such such a over the top reaction. But I have seen, I mean, I just before we started this interview, I was looking. And I mean, I saw a comment from someone that's like, I have to, this person basically said, this is not a direct quote, but they're asking, what do we have a union for? What do I pay in dues for? Right? It's at a moment like this that we need an organization that that can give teachers an effective direction, not just for their anger, but an effective direction where they can start to affect change. And I think that's why teachers are going towards these really kind of grassroots things, such as the petition against public school or the private schools being funded with public funds, which I support entirely, and the recall petitions.
What was made very clear to me in my interviews and in the conversations I've had with teachers is that this isn't just about pay, and it is about class sizes and complexity in the class. That's fair enough.
Mhm.
But or more than that, it's also about the future of public education in Alberta. That this is, as you say, that it's been underfunded.
Mhm.
Funds have been shifted over to the private schools and so on. And teachers feel like they have to draw a line in the sand, one that the government can't jump over, and that the teachers will defend it. Is that an accurate reading, in your opinion?
Oh yeah, I think this has gone well past and just a matter of collective bargaining. It is trying to basically, yes, you put it well, trying to protect public education as we know it. I think might be the short way of putting it. Like I know that you in your role, you energy media, you've done a lot of stuff about the oil and gas industry. There is, and I don't know whether you'd agree, but this is a different breed of conservative than what we saw previously. I mean, I think there were legitimate criticisms to be made about the progressive conservatives, in particular post-Klein progressive conservatives, although I think there was a period of time under Stelmach when, in relation both to sort of resource management and also education, healthcare, there's been some ups and downs. But this group of people, at the end of the day, the progressive conservatives I grew up with, I was born in 1970, when the resource revenue came, there was a sense that, when the money came, all boats would be lifted, right? That money would come to public education, would come to public health care. That's just not the case here. These people had 3 years of multi-billion-dollar surpluses, 11.6 billion in a single year. In that year, we had the lowest funded per student funding in terms of education. That means it is not a fiscal decision. This is a political priority for these people to defund and underfund education. And their clear intention is to underfund it over time, weaken it, and privatize it.
Let me address that for a moment because you've hit on something that we've been doing for a long time. We've been interviewing experts about this government back when Jason Kenney was the premier and now that Danielle Smith is. And I'll sum it up for you this way. I interviewed Professor Dwayne Bratt, from the political scientist from the Mount Royal University. Dwayne is not a lefty kind of. He's very much a centrist. And he said Danielle Smith is a radical populist. He chose that word very carefully. He said she is a radical populist. I've interviewed Dr. Jared Wesley from the University of Alberta. He says she is an authoritarian populist. So there's plenty of evidence, but I want to close with my thought here, Peter. We're currently doing a series of interviews with scholars in both the US and Canada about how the Project 2025 and the MAGA culture are all about breaking the administrative state, breaking the machinery of government, privatizing it or eliminating it, or minimizing it in a way that we haven't seen since prior to FDR in the 30s. And we're drawing with the interviews a direct line between the MAGA culture and the Trump administration and Danielle Smith and her United Conservative Party. I liken it to Trump 1.0 was testing the boundaries. He wasn't quite sure. He wanted to, what could he do? What could he not do? Trump 2.0 came with a playbook from Project 2025 and a very clear strategy and the people in place to do it. This is not, what he's doing down there is not by happenstance. Danielle Smith is 1.0. And so the question becomes, what happens if there's a Danielle Smith 2.0, just like there's a Trump 2.0? And that's my frame in which I view the teacher strike.
Yeah, well, I agree that she clearly, I mean, she has said multiple times, expressed her admiration, gone down and had, fawning interactions with Trump himself, right? We're talking about a person, even their book ban, which, really was a grenade they intended to lob at teachers until it blew up in their own face. Because it wasn't, of course, a book ban, right? They thought they could be cute with it. What they did was take a list of banned books from the United States, looked at that list, generated a list of rules, a set of rules that they thought would ban the very same books. But somehow it never occurred to them that in taking that approach, some other books sort of catch a stray round. And what ended up catching a stray were books like Catcher in the Rye, right? Like, so their problem was they were too clever for their own good, and that's what they ended up coming up with. But all of this is we're talking about people who are, it's like anybody else. They're copying their homework off the folks down south, right? What they're trying to implement, they're trying to find a way to implement a version of it here that it will be palatable in Alberta. And the key is, I think, Alberta, I realize Alberta is, generally regarded as, it's between it and Saskatchewan, I think, at this point, but a very conservative province. But Alberta is also a very, if you moved Alberta as a province into the United States, it's a blue state, right? Like Alberta isn't that. And so I think that maybe I'm wrong, but I get the impression we've started to see a divergence between, I think the honeymoon for Danielle Smith, we'll see what the polls say, etc. But it may have started to end with the book ban. And I think this teacher strike really did put a lot of pressure on them politically.
Peter, let's circle back to the negotiations because you were the chair, in fact, of the Central Table Bargaining Committee. You resigned on September 19th. But in your opinion, did the government come to the table and bargain in good faith?
Ultimately, no. Now, I want to make a proviso. I think the people who sat across the table from us, the actual individuals, that we sat across from as what they call TIBA, I think those people were there in good faith. But their mandate for bargaining was such that we could not reach a deal. Basically, we were asking for things. I'll give you an example. And I'm not sure if I can even speak out of school on this, but I'm gonna. The government has recently said that it's their intention to restart the collection of data. Okay, we brought this up at the bargaining table, and it was an absolute no, in terms of data collection, because one of the issues, right, like teachers. I think at this point after the strike, there's no, you'd have to be living under a rock not to realize that teachers are very, very concerned about class size, class composition, class complexity. It's impossible to teach. But if you're going to try and find, to bargain, parameters for what a classroom should look like, you need to have a sense of what the status quo is. It's very hard to bargain with, a hood over your head. And the government had no interest whatsoever in that. I can't remember the details, but their response to that request was kind of laughable. That indicated to me, and I said this to another member of the bargaining committee at the time, when they said they didn't want to even consider collecting the data, that indicates we're talking about a group of people who didn't have a mandate that could lead to anything that would be meaningful.
Now, clarify this for we non-teachers in the
Hmm.
audience. My viewership, I don't think will understand what you mean by collect the data. Maybe you could explain that.
Sure. So teachers do, I think everyone would recognize this. Teachers do attendance, elementary teachers. I do attendance twice a day, once in the morning, once after lunch. That information goes into just a database. And for years, between something, I think it was about 2006, 2008, somewhere in there, there was basically this data was collected. Okay. It was collected and held private. We weren't able to see it. So it didn't have really much of an effect. The NDP released that data, and Janet French, a very conscientious reporter, then with the Edmonton Journal, now with the CBC, but then with the Edmonton Journal, did a breakdown of this information. Okay, so this information just gets collected routinely, and all you got to do in their data collection system, basically toggling some switches almost, and then you have an idea of class size and class composition. Well, to some extent, it wasn't very good with class composition. I will say that there was problems with the data, but class size in particular, pretty good. And so that data is extremely important just to see like what the trends are. If you're a person, I'll liken it to what's going on in healthcare, honestly. The government also, I'm sure you're aware, stopped collecting data about patients dying while waiting for surgeries, while waiting for diagnostic tests. Well, if you're an honest, government and consider yourself a steward of a healthcare system, that's data you need. If people are dying while waiting, that means something's wrong and you need to fix it. If class sizes are getting unmanageably large, you need to know it so you can address it. But they turned out the lights, so no one would know on both of those facts, on both of those data sets. And so when I say collecting the data, we were asking, because they wouldn't do it, they weren't doing it on their own anymore. They stopped doing it in 2019 when the UCP took over. So what we ended up, we asked for it in bargaining, and it was a hard no at the time. I hope
So
that, does that answer your question or no?
no, that answered my question very well because what it says is, to me as a layman, is looking at that. If you were having a debate about class size and you don't have any data on class size, how do you have the debate?
Well, yeah, and it opens the door to this kind of honestly kind of knuckleheaded way of looking at it. Danielle Smith making her comments about like basically taking the total number of teachers, the total number of students. Well, and it means a class size of like I can't remember, it was 15 or something like this. And a teacher I thought very cleverly said, "Well, that would be like taking the total population of all the cities in Alberta, divided by the number of cities, and then determining that you don't have any cities bigger than 25,000, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense. It is an idiotic way of thinking about this issue because of course you're going to have hotspots, and we have two cities that are unlike the other 17 in the province of Alberta. So we have some places with incredible hotspots, very large classes, almost to the point now, as I understand it, in a place like Calgary, high school teachers, I mean, if you have a class of less than 40, it sounds like you're counting your lucky stars. So, and that there was a time when that was kind of unheard of.
Right.
So, yeah, so this is, again, I'll come back to it. You're dealing with people who don't fundamentally have the best interests of public education at heart at all. Their goal, and this comes back to your MAGA analogy, these are people who aren't interested in building things. They're interested in breaking things. And we cannot cooperate with these people the way that we once were able to cooperate. Like I lived under conservatives, like conservative, I'm a pretty left-wing guy personally, but there was lots of good and effective cooperation. I think Alberta for years had an excellent education system because we had conservatives, we had governments in place that were genuinely invested in making it so we had a good and functional public education system because it was good for the province of Alberta. These people have an ideological bent, an ideological mission to destroy public education, to destroy public health care. And you can't cooperate with these people the way that you cooperate with people in the past. It's just a different animal entirely.
Okay, I'm going to sum up what we've talked about, Peter, this way. It sounds to me like, okay, teachers were angry going into negotiations. They were going angry, really angry going into the strike. None of they got a pay raise, which is great. Everybody likes that. But some of the core issues, like around class size and complexity, were absolutely not dealt with. The way it was handled by the government made them angry. The ATA is coming in for some criticism, and there's nothing here there's no pressure relief valve.
Mm-hmm.
And so what might that pressure relief valve look like? The only thing I can see is that the labor movement kind of gets rolling on their consultations and rotating actions, whatever those might be, and that satisfies teachers' sense that at least we're doing something. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Well, yeah, I think it is. I'll phrase it somewhat differently. I mean, I think the Alberta Teachers Association is going to have to, I think belatedly reckon with the fact that what we are is a union. This government stripped away the discipline process. So when they took away discipline, they didn't put it with a college. They gave it to government. Okay. So a large part of our claim as a sort of a professional association, and I mean, if you're okay with me getting in the weeds just for a moment on an issue, the Alberta Teachers Association isn't like other unions. because we were created by an act of the legislature. Okay. Most unions are created by people unhappy with how things are in their workplace. They gather, they form a union at their workplace. Over time, they form like locals. And over time, those locals form a larger association, a larger union, right? Or join a larger union, depending on nowadays, more of a joining kind of a process. The Alberta Teachers Association, the way it came about, Bible Bill Aberhart was a teacher. I think he might have been a principal in Calgary Public, and he got fired. And then he ended up running, becoming premier. And almost as an act of vengeance, he created the Teaching Profession Act, which created the Alberta Teachers Association and made membership in the ATA automatic. When that happened, when he did that, so the ATA was created by the legislature, and it was the ATA created by the legislature, like created by an act of the legislature, that created the unions. Usually, almost every other union, it goes the other direction. It goes from the ground up. The ATA was created from the top down. And honestly, there was a time when that top-down culture served us. Because back with those kind of, I don't know, petroleum club kind of Lougheed conservatives, they were institutionalists talking to other institutionalists. It was effective. Backroom conversations were effective, right? But these people aren't like that. Okay, the people who are in power now. But what I think has happened to the Alberta Teachers Association, we have the same people using the same playbook they used with the old PCs. And boy, is it not working. It is not working. It's not working for teachers. It is not working for public education. And what we need to do is basically embrace the fact we're a union. We have to become an activist grassroots association. And we have to look at the strength of this organization. The strength of the ATA is entirely in, as Coach Phil Jackson said, the strength of the wolf is in the pack and the strength of the pack is in the wolf. We have to focus on people on the ground. It's the teachers. We have to motivate and activate our teachers because they hold great credibility in their communities. They have a lot of connections, and we have to become, in a way we never have before, an activist union. Unlike at any point certainly in my career, and I think at any point in the history of the association.
Well, Peter, thank you very much for this. I mean, you've given us plenty of insights, and I certainly understand the issue much better than I did before. And it sounds like we'll be checking back in with you in the not too distant future because this story simply isn't going away. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Arkham.